Let's go to that big news out of the United States today. Donald Trump surprising everyone. I think probably even his staff in his office. Certainly I looked at some footage, people standing around him in the Oval Office looked pretty surprised that America will take over the Gaza Strip and redevelop it.
The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip and we will do a job with it too. We'll own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site, level the site and get rid of the destroyed buildings, level it out, create an economic development that will supply unlimited numbers of jobs and housing for the people of the area.
Joining me now, foreign editor at The Australian, Greg Sheridan. Well, Greg, we said it certainly won't be boring. We said there'll be a lot of shock and awe in the first few weeks of his presidency, but, you know, you're quite shrewd, a bit of a sage. I don't think even you sort of were able to predict this one.
Peter, great to be with you. No, certainly Trump is unpredictable. But look, I've got a piece in tomorrow's paper, I think, arguing a minority interpretation of this. Of course, the idea that America will own Gaza is completely bonkers. But we've just got to kind of try to imagine the Trump method and also look at what he's done in the past and look at the whole message out of today. Now, a lot of what Trump said today is absolutely true, and no one else would say it, which is that the endless cycle of, giving Gaza aid, Hamas steals the aid, builds weapons to attack Israel, Israel is forced into war with Gaza, destroys the infrastructure, the Europeans pay for it to be rebuilt, and all it goes over and over again. That is the sum total of the liberal consensus on policy towards Gaza. And Trump says it's crazy, it's not working, and he's not going to participate in it. He made a lot of other big decisions today. Iran won't have a nuclear weapon. The US is withdrawing from the UN Human Rights Council. UNRWA gets no more funding. These are all huge decisions, overshadowed by what he said about Gaza. But look at what he said about Gaza in another way. He's offering the Gazans a vision of what could be. This coastal strip and Trump's essential real estate developer view of the world, it is a benign view of the world. Coastal resorts and condominiums have been a way to wealth and good jobs for lots of third world countries. If Gaza had a leadership that was concerned with the welfare of its own people, it would be trying to do this itself in cooperation with Israel instead of waging these insane Islamist wars all the time against Israel. Now, nonetheless, the president deserves to be evaluated on what he said, and what he said can't possibly happen. But all this energy and this renewed commitment to Israel, his influence with the Gulf Arabs, it is by no means inconceivable that he could move the situation forward as he did in his first term. The Middle East was a signal success for Trump with all the Abraham Accords.
It was.
So, it's day one. The one wise thing Albanese did today was to shut up about it and say, look, okay, well, let's see what happens. Let's see what he really has in mind here as things unfold.
I do wish he'd actually said something a bit like that, Greg, but he just said, I'm not going to have a running commentary on everything the US president says. But when the US president says something as substantial as this, and given the homegrown impacts we have of that conflict in Australia, he should have had a couple of lines with a bit more depth than, I'm just not going to talk about Donald Trump. I thought he owed us a bit more than that.
Well, sometimes when you've got nothing to say, better to say nothing. I mean, could have been better, but it could have been a lot worse. So, I'm not shy of criticising the Prime Minister, but I think a measured, stately silence is not the worst thing you could expect from a left-wing Labor government in the face of this Trump stuff today. But I do think that this very tight Trump-Netanyahu alliance is part of a very changed dynamic in the Middle East. And the Gulf Arabs are going to be dealing with Trump's power and with Netanyahu's power, and this can be constructive. We can't obsess over the difficulty of assessing Trump is that he does say some stupid things, but he also does and says some very good and brave things. And it's quite possible you could get some forward movement out of this. Certainly, it's the most interesting thing anyone has said about Gaza. I think, in my lifetime, really.
Yeah, and look, I think your point's so right at the top there that the status quo has not worked. If we keep doing the same thing, we'll get the same result. That's the adage, as we know. So there has to be a game changer. There has to be some way to get into that tunnel infrastructure and deal with that tunnel infrastructure and try and give the poor people, the residents of Gaza, some chance at a future. Because going through this cycle, we're just going to revisit this in the next 10 years. Hey, talk about Trump's tariffs here as well. Yeah, please, Greg, please.
Just one other tiny final point on Gaza. Trump didn't talk about forced relocation of Palestinians, but everybody tries to keep the Palestinians as refugees forever for political reasons to bash Israel. If the Gazans want to migrate to nearby Arab-speaking Muslim countries, well, that'd be a good thing if they want to do that. Not all 2 million of them, but if some of them want to do that, if Trump is arguing for that. If they want to have them, okay, it's unlikely at the moment, but instead of forcing them to remain refugees forever, I mean, there are people whose grandparents went to Jordan who are citizens, who are ministers, who have been ministers in the Jordanian government, who are still officially refugees. Well, that's insane. So Trump is moving against that kind of perpetual forever refugee status. And if that means partly Gazans can migrate somewhere else, anywhere that'll have them, that's a good thing. Very distressing and radical for the Palestinian leadership class, but probably good for any Gazan who can get out of Gaza.
Not dissimilar, Greg, to a whole Aboriginal economy activist class here who don't want to actually see conditions improve in remote communities because they need the squalor and the poor outcomes in those communities to keep the profit-making machine happening in the cities, and, not too dissimilar here. Hey, tariffs just before we go. We know that Canada's blinked. We know there's been movement in Mexico. The levies on China are pretty hard, and the Chinese, of course, have now hit back in relation to the United States. Give us your read on this.
I always thought tariffs against Mexico and Canada were not realistic in the long run. I even said on Sky and in the paper that the matter would be resolved in weeks, not months, and the Canadians and Mexicans would do something to placate Trump. It's a rough, grubby, untidy way to play politics, but it's worked. Trump has threatened tariffs and got policy results that he wanted. That's very much the Trump playbook. It's not the ideal way politics should go. With China, I think it's a bit different. I do think, the world needs to decouple the free world from the Chinese world. We are more dependent on China than we've ever been on any country since before the UK joined the common market in Australia. That's strategic madness. I think the Trump tariffs on China are more likely to stay, and they are of much more strategic significance than the ones on Canada and Mexico, which were, again, a bit of Trump theatre, but it worked. I mean, you can't argue with a politician who gets the results that he wants.
That he does. All right, Greg, thank you. I'll look forward to the column tomorrow.